Hello, people, and welcome to the People Building Podcast, where today we are going to be joined by the amazing Nicole Kerr. Now, if you are not a very spiritual person, or you are someone who doesn't really engage with beliefs around afterlife or soul, spirit, that kind of stuff, you need to watch this, because Nicole comes at this from not just personal perspective, but actually a scientific perspective as well. And that makes all of what she says even more intriguing. Now, before I tell you a bit more about her, I first have to apologise for the delay in service. It's been a while since I've released a podcast. It's not because I haven't been doing them. I have chockloads of them to share with you. I just haven't had the time to sit down and edit because I was busy. Graduated, so that happened. And yeah, lots of other bits and pieces that have completely sideswiped me and kept me busy for the last few months. But let's not talk about me. Let's talk about Nicole Kerr. So Nicole is an author. She's a nutritionist. She has many different credentials under her belt, but the thing that's bringing her to this podcast for you today is her experience on the other side, because she has had not one but two near-death experiences. However, her story really starts much earlier than that, because she's from a complex family where religion was a strong undercurrent for both her parents, and they had different religions. So that in itself kind of set the stage for how she would later experience the processing of trauma and communication and healing and all of those things that came off of the back of a very severe accident that she experienced. Now, in spite of that, you're going to hear Nicole telling you to stay true to your heart and your soul, because as someone who has been brought up around religion, she had subscribed to lots of rules and lots of fear, and part of her recovery from the accident was also around recovery from those indoctrinations that she had experienced as a young person, and finding healing not just for her physical body but actually for her emotions and how she was processing information about the world as well. I need to tell you that my audio is glitchy on this one. I apologise for that. I think Zoom was not loving me that day. Or maybe I just didn't have my microphone set up properly. In the beginning, it sounds like I'm talking over Nicole. I don't think I did do that. I think there might have been a bit of audio delay. And later you'll hear that my voice sounds quite quiet in places, but then it sort of bumps back up. I think actually what it may have been is I might have had the air conditioning on in the room. And so sometimes Zoom has this setting where it will, in an attempt to drown out background noise, might accidentally drown you out too. It could have been something like that. So I apologise for that, but actually Nicole is an excellent orator. So you don't really need me in this one, because she is the one that's doing most of the talking, and she's absolutely the one that you most certainly want to be listening to. So this horrific accident that Nicole experienced, she was left for dead as a result of this accident, and her memories around it were not retrieved until almost 20 years later. So she was left with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and yet she found peace and healing and comfort in the near-death experiences that she had, because during that time she met her own angel. The character, the spirit, I'm not sure how to refer to them, who told her, actually, no, you're not bailing out of life just yet. You need to get back into it, because you have an important message to deliver for the rest of your life, which is telling other people not to be fearful of death. And part of that healing that was to come her way was also around the personal relationships that she has with her parents, and having to overcome the fears associated with their rejections that she experienced as a child and growing up. So Nicole's story is fascinating. I think you will absolutely agree with me that for someone who has been through such a lot, she has such vivacious energy, such a, like, just a beautiful sunlight vibe about her. You are going to love listening to her. So I will introduce you now to the wonderful Nicole Kerr, and I will see you on the other side of this podcast to discuss my final thoughts on this particular show. Welcome everybody to the People Building Podcast, and today I have a very colourful and very special guest, and this, everyone, is Nicole Kerr. So Nicole has got probably one of the most extraordinary stories of anyone that's ever been on the People Building Podcast, and I think this is going to be one that maybe opens your eyes, maybe opens your mind. I don't know where this conversation is going to take us, but I am very excited to have her on with us today. So welcome along, Nicole. Please tell us a little bit about yourself to get the ball rolling on this conversation.
Oh, well, Jenna, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I am so excited, delighted, and grateful. I really am grateful that I have your platform to share my message. And you're right, my story is unbelievable, and it continues to unfold. You know, it isn't a one-time event and then boof. Healing, as most people know, is not a linear journey, but my background is I live presently in New Bern, North Carolina, which is on the Outer Banks on the eastern part of the United States. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, which is a very poor state, probably the poorest state in the United States. And we just moved here to New Bern, my husband and I, about 2 years ago. But before that, we were in Hawaii. So we were there for almost I was there 17 years and he was there 27 years. So we met and married there. And for all of those looking for people to marry, I didn't get married till I was 40. Okay. So don't give up hope that there's somebody out there for you. Just stick to your values and what you want. And everybody said, Nicole, there's nobody in Hawaii for you. I'm almost 6 feet tall. And they're like, they're all shorter than you. And they all live at home with their parents because real estate is so expensive. But there was Paul. So just believe it really is about intention and manifestation, and just stay true to your heart, your soul, and follow it. And it will come despite the odds. But growing up, I grew up in a section called the Bible Belt. That's the whole southern region. So church was very important, and that factors into my story a lot because I was raised Southern Baptist and I was raised Lutheran. My mother was Lutheran, my dad Baptist, and they both believe in God, but their definitions of God, their concepts of God are a little bit different. But all of them have rules. Whether you're Catholic or any of them, there's lots of rules you have to follow. Okay, so the element of fear gets instilled in you as a young child. If you don't follow the rules, you're going to go to hell and you're going to be separated from God and your parents. So you grow up in a fear-based society, you know, essentially. But my story really happens when I went from high school into college, and I went to the United States Air Force Academy. And that is one of the sister schools to West Point, Annapolis, which and where you are, it's a 4-year military academy where you come out as an officer in one of the different branches of the military. So my dad had been back in 1960. He was in the Marines. I'm a recovering people pleaser. Now, some of you may know about people pleasing and not, but it really is a myth that it's an identity that will get you somewhere, because in the end, you give up being who you really are. You're giving people your opinion of what you think they want to hear instead of being honest. So you never develop that sense of identity of this is my truth and I'm going to speak it. So it's a really hard identity to get out of, because we get a lot of, quote, praise from helping others, but there's a difference in people pleasing and serving others. And I really want to make that distinction, because you serve others from your heart, but people pleasing can just be, you know, I've got to make mom happy all the time. You know, I can't say no to her. Yeah. So I grew up people pleasing my father. I'm the second of 4 kids. I was a big baby, 10.5 pounds coming out. So my dad thought I would be like a football player. And needless to say, I wasn't, but I wanted to be daddy's girl. I wanted his love and affection and all of that. And my dad was very much hardcore Marine, by the book, by the rules. You do what I say. We grew up very, I would say, protected, sheltered, very much had to go to church a lot. I never dated. So here now I'm going to a school with 4,000 guys, and I'm not supposed to. His rules were not to date, not to drink, and not to smoke. His father was an alcoholic, so he said, no alcohol in the house, and I don't want you drinking. So those were his rules going in there. So I went off, and believe me, I never in the wildest imagination thought I would go to a military academy, because all during high school and junior high, I didn't do anything military related, Gemma. I was a model. I was the head of a teen board. I was in junior achievement. I was in the newspaper. You know, the Rockettes that we had, the drill team. You know, I did all these things that would never have prepared me for the military. So when I got there in Colorado Springs, the first 3, there's 6 weeks of boot camp you go through, and the first 3 weeks you go through, then you get a telephone call. Okay. So this was in 1983. They had recently admitted women. It used to be all male. And so I was in the 6th class of women. So there was a lot of men that really resented women still being allowed there. A lot of abuse. You're going to just, any of them. It's physical abuse, it's mental, it's psychological. And now that you've introduced women, it's sexual abuse going on. So the abuse was widespread. When I got my 3-minute call to call home at the middle of the 6 weeks, I heard my mother's voice, and I absolutely started crying, and I could not cry. I mean, I couldn't stop crying for the entire 3 minutes. So
just what was your age at that point in time? How old were you?
19.
19.
So,
okay.
So all my other friends were off in their universities, partying and fraternities, sororities, having a great time. And I was, you know, doing the confidence course, the obstacle course. I was doing stuff that scared the living poo-poo out of me, you know, and I didn't know if I would ever get through it. I mean, my fear of like, when they say, okay, you're going to, you know, do this obstacle course. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you know, I don't know if I can jump that far or whatever. So anyway, I cried, and I realized years later that was a panic attack. That was the first panic attack I had that I couldn't even speak. And what I needed from my mother and my parents was permission to quit, to say, if this isn't the right place for you, it's okay to come home. It's not, you're not a failure because you want to quit. But I associated, if I quit, I was a failure, and I couldn't do that. I just couldn't bear that shame and that sense of I'm less than and not good enough, because it was so hard to get in initially. You have to go through so many tests. So I gutted it out. I did it my first year, and I knew I just didn't want to go back, but Jenna, I just couldn't say, Dad, I can't go back, you know? So at the beginning of my sophomore year, there was a squadron event, and there was beer provided for all the cadets. And needless to say, I got there late and I got the last ride home. I got a ride home with a senior who I really didn't know. And he had been drinking, but I was like, okay, we just have to get back to the academy. And that was maybe 20 miles away. And so we left and we went to a bar. He wanted to stop at a bar. He was a senior. And I'm like, okay, let's have some fun. You know, I've always have been real restricted in my life. Let's have a beer and let's, I smoked my first cigarette, you know, I was trying to just.
All the things that Dad said don't do.
Yeah.
You basically went for them all in one evening.
I did. And Jenna, then it got, you know, he wanted to make out at the Rocky Mountains, you know, pull off and stop. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head here. Let's just get back to the academy. All I wanted was a ride back, you know?
Yeah.
And so he got really angry at me, and my memory came back 19 years later of really what happened. But that's the point where my memory initially stopped. And then I never made it back to the academy, and wound up in the ICU at a local community hospital. And so I had a gap there from 7:30 in the evening to 7:30 the next morning when I woke up in the ICU.
Okay.
So the only thing I remembered was bright, white, clear lights. That was it. Okay. And I just never had any memory of anything other than that. So I went through the rehab. I was pronounced dead at the scene. I later learned all of this from my paramedic coming and seeing me 10 weeks later, medical record, district attorney. I have it all documented in the book. You Are Deathless. And he told me that when he got to the scene, that there were some bystanders who heard it, came out, called 911, and came over to look at me, could not get any vitals on me. So they went and they got a blanket and they covered me up. It took the first responders 10 to 13 minutes to get to me. So I was quote, clinically dead for that time period. When the first responder got there, he took the blanket off and he went through all of his motions to see if he could get any vitals, and he couldn't. So the last thing he tried was this procedure called a sternal knuckle press, which is designed to elicit pain in the body. And the only thing that happened was my right eye flinched and the pupil dilated. That was it. Have you ever heard of the saying, your eyes are the window to your soul?
Your soul,
Okay. My soul had flown out of my body when I went through the windshield when it initially happened. Okay. My soul left my body and my real body went and fell in a ditch. And so in order for my soul to come back, which I did not want to do, it came back through my eye. And so at that point, he was able to get a blood pressure of 60/0. Now, normal blood pressure is 120/80. So you can see how I would still be in the close to death range. Okay. Multiple injuries, amputation on my left foot. I cut a 4th-degree laceration between my anal and sphincter. So huge hole I took out because I remembered later, butt up through the windshield. Okay. And so I had my feet on the dashboard. So it saved my face, although I did have a bad road burn from skidding along the pavement, but it basically saved my head and my spinal cord. But I broke my pelvis on both sides. I severed my wrist. I mean, I was in bad shape. And I proceeded to be in the hospital in Colorado Springs for 4 months, 7 weeks in ICU. And there's a whole list of, 64 pints of blood. Had to have a colostomy, which at age 19, when I woke up from surgery to have a colostomy was, what is this, and nobody's going to want to have sex with me because they're going to see my intestine hanging out and they're just going to gross them out because it's grossing me out, So it was just a lot of up and down. Every time I started to get better, something would set in. So my mother did come out for that entire 4 months and she stayed with me. My dad would come in during a surgery, and then he would leave.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
2 of my 3 siblings did come out.
Okay.
So, in the 7 weeks that I was in ICU, I had 6 major operations. Okay. And in one of those, I coded. And I just remembered, not even 3 weeks ago, that entire series of events that happened in the OR. So here it was 20 years later that I remembered what happened during the accident. And now another 20 years, I'm remembering the second near-death experience. Okay. And that was caused by my husband and I went to New Orleans, and we live in North Carolina. And we got on the plane, and there was turbulence for the entire hour and a half. And I had a panic attack on the plane. So I tried to manage that as best I could. But all I can think of is I'm not in control. I'm seatbelted in. I can't get out. I can't open the emergency exit door and leave here. I can't get enough air. I had the air jet on me, and I have no control over this plane. And that was how I felt in the operating room when I had to have an emergency surgery where they had to cut me open from the top all the way down to get at these different bacteria. I had sepsis, I had gangrene, I had 3 other bacteria, and they were causing me to get sicker and just real distended and bloated. So I started to code on the gurney on the way to the operating room.
Wow.
And you can read that whole blog. I just posted it on my website about I remembered the details. I could feel them cutting me. I could feel them talking. And what happened was my soul it left my body, but it didn't go. It kind of was like an out-of-body experience more than an NDE. I sat there and I watched the whole thing, and I heard the whole thing. And I really realized that operation, which was 2.5 weeks after the initial crash, was I really do not want to be here. I do not want to live my life with now all of these huge scars, this colostomy. They had to do the colostomy in that, or they were going to lose my leg and other areas. So it was just, I just couldn't believe my memory was coming back 40 years later. It was bad that it came back 20 years later. But the truth is, somebody actually questioned it and said, do you have any proof that, from your medical team, that this actually happened? And I wrote my surgeon in Colorado, and she wrote back, this is an accurate vision. So it just tells me that the body remembers. And even 40 years later, you can still remember these things. It's the trigger that causes it. And I had thought I have done so much work my whole life on trying to heal from this, Gemma, that's the last thing that I thought would happen. But I deal with PTSD, I deal with anxiety, depression, and that just hit me out of the blue. I didn't expect the turbulence to do that. And needless to say, it was all the emotions I was feeling in the operating room, because they didn't put me all the way under, because they thought they would lose me since I was already coding. So they gave me some muscle relaxant and just a little bit of anesthesia, but I did feel it and remember it correctly. And my angel, this is the part that I think is phenomenal, is when we go back to the first NDE, I was working in Atlanta, Georgia at the Centers for Disease Control. I'd gone on with my life. I'd gotten home. I got a discharge from the military. They gave me 100, I'm a disabled veteran now. And I had no concept of what happened. And then 19 years later, and you have to remember, I was 19 when the accident happened. And then 19 years later, boom, I go into Starbucks to get my usual drink, go to work. And on the way to work, I remembered exactly how I was sitting in the car. And I had one foot on the dashboard, the other one crossed over, and I went butt up through the windshield. And I remembered all the details. And I remember knowing when I froze up in the air that I looked down and I knew I was going to die. And so at that point, an angel came and took me. And in the book, I call it Casper the Ghost, and it was male. I had all the unique identifiers, but it wasn't until after the book was published in August that my angel, my grandfather on my father's side, who happened to be an alcoholic his whole life, he came to me. He was 58 years old when he died, and he died in August, mid-August. So boom, in my meditation, here he comes. And I knew it because I was smelling cigar smoke, and nobody in my house, smokes cigars. And I'm like, this is really odd. I'm smelling cigars. And then my grandfather came and he said, Nicole, I'm the one that came in an angelic form and brought you up. And I was just like, wow, because I had heard with other near-death experiences, people had crossed over and seen deceased loved ones and family members. And I just never had that. All I could say was Casper the Ghost, kind of figure. So he took me up and to a space. It wasn't, like heaven described in the Bible. That wasn't the existence. It was just up to this space. And I remember I could look down. I was not in my physical form now. I'm in my soul form. I could see my physical body lying in the ditch. I remembered exactly what I was wearing, and I could see I was dead. And it was just a corpse down there. And I could hear other voices around me, either angels, guides, and they weren't speaking English. I don't know how I knew, telepathy or whatever. But one of the conversations that was going on next to me that was important for me to remember coming back was that we have angels. Every single one of us has at least one guardian angel, and some of us have more. And we have to ask them for help. Okay. They're not going to interfere in our lives because we have something called free will. So we need to start establishing a relationship with that spiritual realm, with those angels, start dialoguing and start asking for help, and not just in a crisis, and prayer, when you think about it, is energy, and all of us are energy. And what comes out of us when we die, our energy body splits open, and that breath that keeps us alive, when you think about it on a cold day and you're breathing, you see that vapor, that's what expels, that's energy, right? That's what goes on. That's our soul. That's what lives on forever. And that's why I wrote the title of the book is You Are Deathless, because your soul lives on forever. And that soul went up and could see all of this on this plane, and also so much more. And it was so beautiful on the other side. I didn't want to leave. And so James, I'm just going to call him James because that's his name, my angel James, after I heard that conversation, I was like, okay, so one of the messages is we need to ask our angels for help, and not just in a crisis. And people laugh at me when I say, even for a parking space, ask the angels. They come through every single time, so start working with them and ask them for some examples and some evidence that they are working, on your behalf. They really do want to do that. And then James said, Nicole, you're going to go back. And I was like, no, because here's the deal, Gemma. I saw what my body looked like. It was mangled. I knew I was going to be physically handicapped in so many areas. And before that, I had been in the prime of health. I mean, to be at the academy and do what I did, I mean, I was a stud, let me just tell you. Okay. So I went from being able to do that to I can't walk. I can't even use the bathroom on my own. I have an arm that's severed, all these injuries that I knew I would have limitations physically the rest of my life. Why would I want that pain and suffering? I knew I was going to have to go back home. I was basically in an infant state in terms of care. My mother was going to have to be there to cook for me and all that, because I couldn't do that. So I was going back to Jackson, Mississippi, where I was being I was not moving forward in my life to become more independent. I was becoming codependent with her. And that meant going back to the Baptist church and the Lutheran church and these churches where my experience of God was very different on the other side. So here I am back in this churches where God was duality. God is love, God is protecting you, God is, all these wonderful things. But if you don't obey God, guess what? The wrath of God's coming on you, and you're going to get punishment and criticism, and you're going to hell and all these things. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I would go back to that and have to listen to it. And the other part was, I knew that I had disappointed my dad, and he blamed me for breaking his rules and that I deserved what I got. That's his mentality. And that was probably the worst part of the whole wreck, was to feel like the fracture of my family and the fracture of my relationship with my father in particular. He was looking for us for achievement, and I just ended that with the accident. He never cared about what I really wanted. It was always what he thought would make me a better person, look good, whatever, and to follow in his footsteps. And it wasn't who I was. And no soul, and I want everyone to hear this, no soul is designed to go kill another human being. And I think that is why in America, at least 22 veterans a day commit suicide, because we are not addressing the fractures in their soul. Their soul gets wounded when they are either shot at, see somebody, some trauma like that. And that's a whole different way of healing than the medical model has, and that is something that I actually did in 2019, was go and have a soul retrieval done with a shaman. But now there's different ways to do that. But your soul does fracture in order to protect you. And so that's a piece I think that is coming on more and more nowadays. But for so many people, they've lost their soul, and they just can't find their way back, and they can't see a way out, and they just want to leave the planet. And so they take their lives.
Yeah.
So anyway, he said, you're going back. And I was like, please, no, I just want to stay up here where it's so beautiful. And he said, Nicole, you have a mission, you have a purpose to go back. And that is to tell people to not be afraid of death. Because at least, Gemma, in our country, we have a culture. Most of the books written about death in our country are cloaked in this veil of doom and gloom. Death has a cloud of depression and negativity around it. And it's just, even our Halloween here, it's all about these caskets with Dracula coming out and scaring people. It's a very scary scenario for kids, death is. And then if you're raised in a religion that is fear-based, you're not, and that's how I died at 19. I died in fear that I screwed up and that I was going to hell. And that is one of the reasons I came back, because that's not the truth. That was a complete lie. It's a false belief system that I had bought into. So it's like I needed to come back and redo it and realize that death is not going to hell. You're not going to be separated. It is absolute beauty, and it's light, and it's loving kindness on the other side. And not only me, but hundreds of thousands of other people that have experienced near-death experiences, they all agree on this. And that's why in the book, I talk about the 10 common lessons from near-death experiences, and they're all positive. And I'm trying to change the narrative in our country, at least, that death is a positive experience. Even though we're human, we're also spiritual. And yes, we have the human feelings, sadness and grief and all of that, but we need to hold that experience for people. But we need to also look at the cosmic context is benevolence and extraordinary, and knowing that truer context of where our soul comes from and how we keep evolving. That is going to enable us to live a happier life here and prepare for our own graceful passing, as well as to support others with their own passing as well. So I hope, to change the worldview, the vibration, and the cultural misunderstanding surrounding death. And to do this, we have to start addressing the fears that we are holding. So that is my kind of
that's where you
that's my mission. That's my mission. And I call myself an internality advocate. And it is a word. William Faulkner used it in his writings, because people are like, you mean eternal? And I go, no, it's internality. And they go, are you sure? I said, look it up. And it means, forever and ever and ever. And that is the truth of our soul, is it goes on. This isn't our first rodeo. We go on forever and ever and ever. But I think your beliefs about God, your concept of God, shape your relationship with death. And it's really important to look at what is your concept of God, not the one that was passed on to you from generations past, but what works for you. Because I can tell you, when I was out there praying in boot camp, God didn't come through for me. There was no, changing something. I still got abused. I still got all these things done. I was sexually abused when I was 8. There was no God there to stop that man from doing that. So I think there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, God didn't protect me. God didn't love me. God didn't help me, so where is God? Because in a relationship, you get some kind of feedback, right? It's not just one-sided. So where's the evidence? Where's the feedback? So I call that a vending machine concept of God, where you put in the right behaviors, you punch the Coca-Cola button and out comes the Coke, right? That's how it's supposed to work. But most of the time you put in the right behaviors, you punch Coke and out comes either nothing or like Mountain Dew, which is not what you wanted, right? That concept is obsolete. And I'm still on the journey of what is my concept of God, and I think we all are trying to, figure out what do we really believe in terms of a higher source or higher power or something that's greater than ourselves. And when I was working with a little 6-year-old girl, I do something called neuro-emotional technique, which helps get at the subconscious. And she was coming from a fundamental church, and she had done something bad, and she was told she was going to go to hell. And she was scared to death, so scared she was having to sleep with her parents, wetting her bed. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So I asked her, I said, well, what is, how do you see God? And she just lit up and she said, and I'm reading from my book, God is a blue spirit with colors and balloons in all different colors, no head, and can talk. Clearly, this little girl is still having a direct experience with God with no filters from other people involved. And I love that, because that basic essence from a child kind of sums it up, doesn't have a head. It's not a person. It's not personal. And it's energy. And God at the bottom, at the end of the day, is love. And love is an emotion, but it's also an energy. There's nowhere God is not. God is not, what I was taught is, God is not external. I've been searching for God externally. You have to get to God through Jesus or all these other means. And God is all within us. And that's one of the lessons I learned on the other side, was God was all around me. God was me. I was God. God was present and fullness and oneness. But most of all, God was love, this pure, non-judgmental, and that's important because we judge a lot here, non-judgmental, love. And in that state, I would say that it was not only that I suddenly had been forgiven for my mistakes, it's that they no longer existed. Nothing I had done on earth was being weighed or measured. And it simply was just the way my story had played out in this one realm. And I think one of the things we need to really do is lighten up on ourselves about judging ourselves, because on the other side, we're not judged. There is no judgment. It's just like I said, it was just how it played out. But we sit here on earth and we judge our thoughts, we judge our emotions, we judge our behaviors. We get into this stew about it, thinking about, oh, I should have done it this way or that way or the other. And I'm like, take that word should out of your vocabulary, because every time you say that, you're shaming yourself, right? I should have done this, or you should have done that. That just shames the person. And that's a very low vibration, as is fear. So, I really want people to understand that that's probably one of the most simplistic but hardest things to do, is to start with themselves and not judge them. And if you don't judge yourself, you're not going to be apt to be judging others. You're going to see that they're coming from a place of where they were judged, and you can help them not to judge themselves, because it doesn't get anybody anywhere except depressed.
Yeah. I have a question for you. That space between having the accident and 19 years later recalling what had happened, where was your relationship with God at during that period of time?
I will tell you that my relationship with God prior to the accident was, I started not believing in the God that I was raised with, because he wasn't coming through for me. So
did your parents know that had happened?
No. I did not tell them. Yeah. And after that, since I couldn't remember being on the other side, I went back to trying to make sense of it in the language of those churches. So I would try different churches. I tried all the Protestant churches. I tried Unitarian, Unity, all of these. And I never could find an alignment what felt true to me. So when I moved to Hawaii, that felt like walking the beach and being in the ocean and nature and being one with all of those elements. That felt like I am one with God in that sense.
So was the move to Hawaii kind of part of maybe an unconscious desire to connect with something, maybe nature, maybe God, but it was all part of that. It wasn't like you moved for work. It was actually part of your spiritual development.
Absolutely. And Hawaii is a very spiritual place. And I think that was the reason. Plus, I met my now husband there. I think that was the reason I was brought there, because my mother and my father are very much, I will just say, religious addicts. And that is one of the hardest relationships to have in terms of addiction, because you're having to deal with a God that they are literally quoting from the Bible. And so they use that as the evidence against you. And it's you can't win. It just, I guess, at the bottom, at the end of the day there, Gemma, it's a loss, And so I tried to please them, and I got really, really sick again 6 years ago. And my parents came out, and my mother actually accused me of creating my illness because I had a Buddha in the house, a statue of a Buddha. And she told me I was not a Christian because I didn't go to church. That's how narrow-minded they had gotten in the belief systems of the church. And I just was like, and I would make up things to try to please her. I would say, I'm going to the church at the beach. And she said, there's no such place. And I said, you don't need 4 walls to have a church. I tried to explain this, but they don't understand my experience on the other side. They don't understand my experience with God. It just is like, we all are these eternal sparks of God, every single one of us. It's just, we're not born in original sin. You can't look at a baby, a beautiful, beautiful baby, and go, oh, you're sinning already on your first breath. I'm just like, that's BS. I'm calling it. It's BS. And so it's really, and when you keep throughout your lifetime being told that you're a sinner and you're bad and you need to repent. I mean, that is not what God, in my opinion, intended. He intends us to enjoy this world, to be joyful, to have this vibration of joy and light and love. And when you're feeling that way, how in the world are you ever going to be able to uplift yourself to that? You're going to have to look to somebody else or a drug or something to do that for you.
Yeah. And you said earlier, so your parents were of slightly different religions. One was Baptist, one was Lutheran. Tell me about the difference between those. I feel like I know something. I know we have Baptist churches in the area where I live, but Lutheran, I know nothing about that. So tell me about the difference between them.
Okay, so there's factions within those denominations. So this is there's Southern Baptists, just like with Lutheran, there's Evangelical Lutheran, Missouri Synod Lutheran.
Okay.
So there's different variations, just like in a political party, it can go extreme, moderate, conservative, liberal. So that's kind of in the churches, it's the same way. The Southern Baptist Church was very much about hell, fire, and brimstone. If you don't follow the 10 Commandments, if you don't do what, it was no dancing, it was no, they were very much about following the scripture to the letter of the T.
To the letter, right.
Yeah, and that if you didn't accept Jesus, that was probably the key piece, Jesus as your personal savior. So the only way to God is through Jesus.
Right.
And so that has, and like my sister is very much of that mindset. She really believes in Jesus. There's a lot of people that do. And what I want to say about that is after I have spent so much time reflecting on this. This has been my journey. I do not have children. I've got two little doggies, but my whole life has been managing my health and trying to deal with my mental health, my spiritual health, all of this. And I will tell you, Jesus to me is a way shower. And I look at Jesus as a way to live your life, because Jesus had all this wisdom, judge not lest you be judged. And yet I would go to church and these people are judging gay people, they're judging queer people, and I'm like, how hypocritical is that? And I think, to me, Gemma, that is one of the things that I would experience in most of these churches was the hypocrisy. It says one thing and does another. I want nothing to do with that, So that is the difference with the Baptist. The Lutheran is more closely aligned with the Catholic Church. So you have Martin Luther's catechism, but they have all the robes and the ceremonies. The Baptist Church, for baptism, you have to be older and they dunk you in a tub of water in front of everybody. In the Lutheran Church, you're baptized as an infant with the sprinkling. So there are even differences like the baptism and when you accept Jesus as your personal savior. In the Baptist Church, you get baptized, but in the Lutheran Church, they want you baptized as an infant in case you die, that you're going to be saved, And so they follow the teachings of Martin Luther more so, and do confirmation classes and things like that you study that. And, they're not as strict in terms of the rules, but there's still the duality of, the Bible is the main text and God is punitive and judgmental if you do not live a Christian life.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, definitely. Would you say that now, with all of what you've been through, your relationship with God still has Christian foundations? Because I guess the thing is that I'm very aware of, from, traveling and having a very broad range of people that I've had the pleasure of interacting with over the years, is that I am aware that I'm part of a culture where there is this idea of there is one God, the God, and there is his son Jesus. And so these are like our kind of keynote characters. But actually, if I go to India, then there's about 70 different gods. And they've all got like different jobs, and they're all a little bit important in different sorts of ways. And then it's like, oh, well, hang on a minute, that's a whole other subscription we're talking about here. So is your personal feeling now still rooted in that kind of solitary Christian God that we typically are introduced to in the Western world, or have you expanded your mind and how you think about what God is?
I have definitely expanded my mind and how God is once I remembered my accident. And that when that happened, then I began my own journey of trying to understand by reading different Wayne Dyer, all these different people and their concepts and ideas about God. Before that, I had not gone in that direction. So more metaphysics and that kind of thing. And so I studied a lot of that, Buddhism, and I started to realize, oh my goodness, what I experienced on the other side was this bright white light, like I was in this cocoon, and it was loving and it was safe and it was just brilliance, and it was colors that are not even in the Crayola color little box. And it was just this beauty and brilliance that was I can't even imagine, I can't even really describe it, but it was just so beautiful. And I did not want to come back to, there's no fear there. There's no negativity. There's no, remember when you were an alcoholic or any of that. None of that exists on that. That's all like wiped out. And so it's all positivity, and it's all beautiful. And so having had that experience, having come back here, I've really had to work on trying to assimilate that in terms of how do I work with the spiritual realm? How do I, what is God? How do I use the word God or source? Or because I know there is nowhere God is not. We don't have to send missionaries anywhere because God is everywhere, so it's all these things that you start realizing. Man has created a lot of this to keep us in fear. And if we're in fear, then we can be controlled. And that's one of the things about death is most of these religions cause you to fear death if you haven't done your life almost perfectly, right? And in fear, you lose your clarity, because in fear, you're coming out of that part of your brainstem called the amygdala, your fight, flight, fear, instead of using this part here called your prefrontal cortex, which is the rational executive thinking. That makes sense. I can understand that. That just gets hijacked. It goes, straight to that amygdala, and that's running your life. And that's why people have a hard time changing, is because they're stuck in a belief system that unless they can understand the root cause of it, they keep getting in a present day situation and get triggered, and they go right back to that 6-year-old or that 10-year-old, and they're right back in that feeling state. They're triggered and they act like they did back then, instead of being able to clear that and understand, oh, I'm not that 6-year-old anymore. I'm a 58-year-old woman, and that is the reason. And that's the hard part about religion, is that you get indoctrinated into it at an early age. And around 6 years old is when developmentally children begin to individuate. So if you're not able to individuate, your parents don't allow you to, no, you can't go run off to the school bus by yourself. I have to be there to walk you, I don't trust you. So you're going to church and you're learning about this. They take concepts literally as children. There's a God person that I'm having a relationship that's sitting up there in the blue sky, but yet he doesn't talk to me, So I think a lot of kids figure it out early that that's not true, but they have to keep going back every single week and get the same stories. And then after a while, they think it's true because their parents believe it as well, and their grandparents believe it. So it's time to awaken and break that cycle, because it's not working for people anymore. And they're already, droves of people have left the church because of that, and because of, the rules of like the Catholic Church and the guilt and the shame that was put on people. That was never meant to be. That's not who God is to guilt you or shame you. And it's not that God made this happen to you because you did something wrong. That is just BS, and so my process is still unfolding, but it goes back to more what that little girl is talking about, is this energy. And, one of the things is everyone and everything is connected. We're not there as a society yet, but from an energetic point of view, that is the truth. And I will tell you, one of the other things that I have struggled with is mental health. And I say that because my parents, when I came out of the hospital after 4 months, the doctor said to my mother, Nicole needs mental health. She needs a psychiatrist and a psychologist because she has been traumatized.
Yeah.
And my mother looked at the doctor and said, well, God and Jesus are our psychiatrist and psychologist, and we'll be just fine. Well, I have to tell you, I was not fine, Gemma. God or Jesus never showed up on my sofa and had a discussion with me, or they never did EMDR, or never did anything, They never gave me anything to work with to help my mental health. So in response to that trauma, the body has to take over and do something to keep themselves safe. So what my body did was develop an eating disorder. I had compulsive eating in 1984. And that's back in the time where eating disorders were not very visible in the community. And I remember, and I talk about this in the book, and it's very, I hated myself because I had all these scars, and, our culture here is based on how you look. A lot of it, beauty and a certain standard of beauty. And I had modeled before, and I went back to try to model, and they go, no, you've got too many scars. So I was just like hooked into that, being defined by how I looked. No guy will look at me because I have too many scars. Now on a man, they're proud of their scars. Look at this from
always.
Yeah, but as women, it's like, let me see how I can cover it up, or I can, hide it, so it was very difficult at age 20 to go into a college setting where everybody is, sororities and fraternities, and looks are very important. So my body's response was to just shove all this food down my mouth because I was in such pain. And it took me, I will say that my eating disorder finally resolved when I got married. It was, I dealt with it at various stages for 40 years, but it was in response to the pain I was in because of the hatred I had toward myself for my dad blaming me, the relationship with my family pretty much blowing up, and not thinking I was stupid to get in the car with someone who was drunk. And then the clicker of that is this past May, so a year ago, my roommate from the Air Force Academy quit that following Christmas. She went home for Christmas break and she never came back. Now, she'd come to the hospital to see me, and I'd stayed in touch with the other two. There were 4 of us in the squadron, and we called her, found her on Zoom, set up a call. I mean, found her on Facebook, called a Zoom meeting. And I had not seen her for 38 years, Gemma. And the first thing she says to me is, Nicole, I'm so sorry. And I said, for what, Margaret? And she said, I caused the car crash. And I said, what do you mean you caused it? It was the guy that was drunk that caused it, you know? And she said, no, you don't understand. She said, we had agreed that we would go back to the academy together. And when the event was over, you came over to me and said, okay, I'm ready to go with you. Let's get in the car. And I said to you, there's another cadet. He's been drinking. He's drunk. So I'm going to take his car. I'm going to drive it. And I like him a lot. And so I don't want you to come with us because, we may go make out or whatever it is. And so I said, really? And she said, well, there's one other car left and he's a senior and he's in a Corvette convertible. And she said, why don't you go with him? And I looked over and I said, but he's been drinking. And she said, well, Nicole, they've all been drinking, they've been just having fun. She said, just go with him, have some fun. I'll see you back at the academy. And she never did. And she never knew that he wanted to stop at a bar. She never knew he was an alcoholic. Neither did I. That came out later. And she didn't think, she just didn't think anything would happen. And so she couldn't live with the guilt. And it haunts her today that she made that decision. And so for 38 years, she has lived with that. And I didn't remember that part. Okay, so that's another piece of this for your listeners is communication with trauma and how you remember something and how someone else remembers it. Because I said, why didn't you ever tell me this? And she said, well, I thought you remembered and you were angry at me and you never wanted to talk to me again. I said, oh my gosh, I've been blaming myself. You're blaming yourself. And the guy that wrecked the car doesn't blame himself. It was unbelievable to me that happened because I kept beating myself up for thinking, how could I get in the car with someone who was drunk, and then he did try to make a sexual pass at me and it got him angry is what I later remembered. And he turned the wheel of the car too fast and it hit a boulder. So I struggled with relationships with men and pleasing them because I thought if I got them angry that I could die again, literally. Yeah. So these things get imprinted in you, and until these memories come through, sometimes you just never can make sense of why you are responding in a certain way, but there is a reason why. And that's what I want to tell people. And when your body feels safe and when you have support, because when you're dealing with trauma, you have got to have a support system. You cannot get through this by yourself. That you need that support. You need to feel safe to be able to process it all. And when you do, your body is ready to let it go. And the body keeps a score. There's a book written by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he talks about that. And it's amazing to me, my body has kept the score. It took it 20 years to release almost the first memory, and now another 20 for the next one, so it is a process. And, when the doctor wrote back, this is an accurate statement, I didn't need the proof, but someone else was like, how are you making this up? And that's totally what a lot of people experience when you're recalling a memory is they don't believe you. You're just making that up. How would you remember that 40 years later? And I think that's one of the areas that we need to be more compassionate and considerate with, is that this takes time, and bodies can only go at the pace that you're able to integrate and align your mind, your body, your soul, and your spirit.
Yeah. I'm curious, and you may or may not know the answer. What happened to the guy who caused the accident?
Well, his dad happened to wear 3 stars on his shoulder. I happened to pick a guy whose dad was very high up in the military, and he made one call to the superintendent of the United States Air Force Academy and said, I don't care what happens to my son, he's going to graduate. He's a senior. And he did. And he was charged by the state of Colorado with vehicular assault and drunk driving. He pleaded guilty. And in May of the following year, right before he graduated, they lifted the sanctions on him, and he was able to graduate and go on and be in the Air Force.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. And I've never had an apology from him. Never. I wrote him once asking for that. And he said that anyway, I've never spoken to him since. Mm-hmm. But he's definitely got a lot of issues.
Yeah. How have you reconciled that side of things with yourself? Because it sounds like you've more than done the work to be able to make peace with the fact that the accident happened, the injuries that you were left with, the mental health challenges that you were left with, the impact that it had on your family and your family relationships. If it were me, I think that's the part that I would struggle with, is knowing that, listen, I subscribe to the idea that if you can take as much responsibility for your own circumstances, even if you weren't causing them to be bad, if you can take responsibility for what you're left with, it gives you a greater sense of control over your life, and you're just able to feel like you're holding the reins much more, and you're more likely to be at peace and feel more empowered and less of a victim. But I also know, if I'm completely honest with myself, that knowing that someone else had caused that accident to happen, I would struggle with reconciling that and having peace with that. Where did you go to around this?
Yeah, that brings up a very good point, is emotions. And that is something that I had to learn and went into neuro-emotional technique, because I was having belching signals and my migraines were getting worse. And I finally found a doctor who said, Nicole, this is emotional. This is not coming from anything organic in your body. Your stomach in Chinese medicine it's the earth element, and it's this feeling of out of control and loss of self-esteem and nervousness and despair and hopelessness and all of these things that I was truly feeling, and was the root core of my relationship with my parents. Especially, it was hopeless. I had no control in this. So I spent 8 years, I went and got certified in this, and actually did open a practice to help deal. I'm a dietitian by training, because I went into nutrition to try to figure out and cure my eating disorder. And guess what? That didn't work, because it wasn't about the food. So then I went into, okay, let's do emotions, because I kind of cut myself off here. I wasn't embodying the emotions. And there's a big difference in thinking the emotions. I'm angry at this guy. Okay. I could say that, but my body didn't respond that way. My body couldn't get at the anger, because there was a part of me that was still blaming myself. So until I forgave that part of myself, then the anger could start coming up. And I think that it's taken me a long time, because in America, we're very emotionally illiterate. We have about 4 feelings we grow up with: bad, mad, sad, and glad. But there's this huge buffet of them. But people are not, they don't check in with themselves, to see what is it I'm really feeling, and really work with integrating at a body, this embodiment piece that is now being taught more. And I think that's a lot of where the eating disorders come from as well. You're disconnected from the head and the body, because once it gets in the body is when you truly feel it and can accept it and move on. And so that's where I had to go in order to get to this place of just letting this person be who he is and get on with his life. Nothing's going to change, but me holding anger toward anybody, my father, my mother, him, it is only a disservice to myself at this point, and I want to be at peace. That's the end game for me, is feeling that peace and that harmony. And I have to be able to forgive and to not necessarily re-engage with them, but forgive myself and my part, and that, I can't go back and redo it. It was a lesson clearly that I've learned from. It changed my entire life. I believe I changed my contract in terms of coming in. I believe we all come in with lessons to learn in a contract, and that mine was revised in order to get this message out now, not to fear. Because if you think about it, in order to you're not going to make a good decision if you're in fear. You're going to lose your clarity of the situation. And in order to regain your clarity, you got to address those fears. And no one wants to address fears. It's hard work. Transforming is hard work. But your fears are mostly irrational. And that's the hard part to really get, is that they're not true. And they come from this existence of limiting beliefs. So without having these limiting beliefs, you're going to be in this state of alignment. And alignment is the goal, in my opinion, to where we can reach this higher level of clarity. And part of that alignment is the emotional part, which is dealing with the feelings of anger, frustration, resentment, gall, depression, emotional repression and depression. And a lot of it in my case was, I don't want to think about it and I don't want to feel it. Okay. And I had a family that supported that. You're walking, you're okay physically, so you're fine. Get on with life. They didn't understand that I was dealing with mental issues. I was dealing with a spiritual conflict, and I was dealing with emotional issues, that were causing me great pain. And your emotions, they say the issues are in your tissues, right? Have you heard that?
No, that's a good one. I'm going to borrow that.
Okay. Yeah. And so you've got to deal. I mean, the Chinese figured this out a long time ago, that the liver is associated with anger and your lungs are grief, and I think in our society today, there's so much that people have not grieved, and lost in whatever realm that is. But I would say it has been a journey for me to get to this place. And forgiveness, you have to understand, it's for yourself. It's not for the other person in that sense. And it does not mean to re-engage with them. It just means I'm so tired of holding this weight of anger, and to understand that it all had a role in my life here and what I've learned. And I've learned so much from this crash. I'm so grateful to have been able to come back and function at the level I do. And the reason, I wrote this book, it took me 13 years, because I used to work at the CDC in Atlanta, the disease detectives. And so I wrote in a scientific way, which is much different than writing a book for the general public. Okay. No one that I know in the general public likes to read a scientific review article, nobody. So I wrote this. First of all, it helped to heal me to write it. Okay. And that's where journaling, I think, helps people. And one good question to ask if you journal is, what does my soul want to tell me today? Because a relationship with your soul is so important, because that's the piece that goes on. And most people don't even know what their soul is. I mean, I grew up in the South, and it was soul food and it was soul music. And all I knew is your soul would go to hell, but understanding what your soul is, and that's that perfect part of you, that you are perfect, that you are loved more than you can imagine, and we have forgotten that because of all the different filters we get raised with. But I did write this book to help with your fears about death, because more people are choosing to leave the planet now, and I believe more will choose to continue to leave the planet. We are in such a conflict state right now, and I think you need to be prepared for death, because none of us are guaranteed that we're going to live even to tomorrow. I certainly didn't think I was going to die at 19, and then in America, we don't even get me started on our gun laws, but we have massacres almost daily. And, this latest one, these people are going shopping in an outlet mall, and, 8 or 9 of them don't ever come home, all ages. And I think you have to, part of this preparation is talking about it with one another. And that's why in my book, I really want book clubs to pick it up so that you talk as a group about death, what your concept is, what you believe. Have you talked to your family about it? To start talking about it and to start understanding that we're all facing it, so hopefully it will help you through your fears. There's a fear checklist as well. I hope it will support you through the loss of loved ones, to understand that you will see them again. We will see loved ones and others when we return, quote, home. And I hope this book inspires you, all of you out there, to live fully, because if you're fearing death, you're not going to truly live. And when I say that, I mean freely, to open up your heart and your hands as wide as possible, and to realize we're all connected, and love truly is the most important thing. But loving yourself is where it has to start.
What would you say is the relationship between love and peace?
Good question. Peace is a state of contentment to me. Is I'm at a neutrality point. I'm at peace with my parents. Okay. When they pass, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to regret anything. I'm at so a state of neutrality where I'm not getting triggered one way or the other with someone else's action.
Okay.
Love. I lived in Hawaii for 17 years. Aloha means more than just love. It is, I love the spirit of the aloha, because it's about collaboration and not competition. And it's about love and hello and all. It's just a wonderful world of word of embracement. But love is not only a noun and a verb, an emotion, but I think the energy of love, and you feel that coming off of people that have unconditional love, like the Dalai Lama, certain people that really have attuned their vibration to such a high level that they're not judging you. They see you for who you are. They listen to you. They don't judge you. You know what I'm talking about? It's those pieces of unconditional love that most of us never got.
Interesting. And I'm super curious as well, because from all of what you've said and my impression of Hawaii, it sounds like it was such a good fit for you to have been there for that period of time that you were. What on earth has made you move?
Oh, the cost of living is one. Hawaii, I'm in North Carolina, so it's about a 40% difference in cost of living. So we were able to buy a house here. Whereas in Hawaii, the amount of rent we were paying in Hawaii, our mortgage here is lower than what we were paying for a rental that didn't even have central air condition. The prices are just so high. You have multiple families living under one roof because of that. And everybody wants to own a car because that's about all you can afford or look to afford. So you have, 1 million people on the island of Oahu, where Honolulu is, but you have 1.2 million cars because everybody wants their own car or two cars. So traffic is extremely challenging, but it's mainly the cost of living, and you're so far from everything. And I think that's part of what allows you to heal there. A lot of people go there to heal. There's, the closest is a 5-hour plane ride to San Francisco or to California, the closest mainland. But the expense is probably the number one. I'm grateful for my time there, but I'm just glad to have moved on to North Carolina, which incidentally, I was born 30 miles away at Camp Lejeune at a Marine Corps base. So I literally come geographically 360 degrees. I never thought I would live in New Bern. So I think the universe has a mystical and just magical way of bringing you around to who you truly are. And that's the goal, is, I think, for all of us, is, that come back to the being that you were born to be, because we forget who we truly are, which are these magnificent, loving, light, perfect beings. And, in the spiritual realm, there's no, we focus so much on our bodies here and looking good and this kind of stuff. And it doesn't matter once, if you go to a funeral and you see a corpse or a dead body, that person, I don't care how good the cosmetologist is, it never looks like Aunt Martha or the person, and that's because their life force energy is not in them anymore. That force that animated them and made them who they truly are. That's the piece I want people to remember.
Yes, of course. What is there still for you to learn? Like, what are the missing pieces of your journey?
Oh my gosh, I just got one today. And that's truly this lesson of forgiving my father for being the type of person he was. He wasn't a father that was a loving, nurturing, kind person. And, to not, is to see him for who he is, not that he's going to change, but to let go of holding my anger toward him for still being, like when I told him about the event with my roommate, he said to me, well, you still made a bad decision. You should have walked back to the academy. And I was just like, excuse my language, but, so I'm still, it's like I haven't talked to him since then. And I won't, but it's going, that's who he really is, Nicole. And, in the spirit realm, that's not who he is, and so dialoguing, I guess, more in that realm, and letting go of the human realm of how he is and how he's treated me, and going, okay, I don't have to put up with this anymore. I'm still trying to be that good daughter. The fourth commandment, love thy parents, until the days of whatever it is. I've actually forgotten it. Wait a minute. Honor thy mother and father until the days, but the thing is, if you have narcissistic parents or toxic parents or whatever, you can love their true spirit, not the circumstances and the environment that caused them to become the human that they are. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Do you ever imagine or maybe meditate on the idea of having a conversation with that spirit side of him, and like what would that be like? How do you imagine that going when it's kind of like all of his judgments are out of the way, and all of his assumptions are out of the way? Who do you see him being then?
I did that with my mother, and you're helping me with my next step. I need to do that with my father, but I did do it with my mother, and it was beautiful. And I saw her spirit, and I saw who she really was. And she was born in Ukraine, has been through World War II. She's had all this trauma. And so is my father. And that's another lesson before I go back to this. Your parents need to have cleared and worked on their traumas. And if they don't, they are still wounded and they cannot help support you with your trauma, because their attitude is just get over it. I had to, I did it. So that is very important. Something that I realized is my parents never got help for any of their horrific traumas, you know, so that when you do the work, you have compassion, you have empathy, you have sympathy. And that's why I put, you know, on my book, one of my credentials is BTDT, been there, done that. And out of all the letters of the alphabet, to me, that is the most important, that someone has, I've had an eating disorder. I know what that feels like. I can help you, you know, I've been to the other side. You don't need to go there to learn these lessons, you know. But my mother, I did this with her, I think it was a couple of years ago. I talked to her spirit and I just pulled her up, and I pulled up mainly her eyes and her nose, because that was her facial features, because that's the piece that I felt I could really see through. And once again, back to the eyes being the window of the soul. And I just told her, you know, Mom, I just need you to know how much you hurt me when you told me that I wasn't a Christian. You were judging me because, you know, I had a Buddha and all this stuff, and how hurt I'd been, and how much I loved you when you took care of me, and then you abandoned me, and then you sided with Dad, all of these things that I had. And, you know, and then I heard from in the meditation, she said, Nicole, I'm so sorry. That wasn't who I truly am. She said, you know, I love you, and I've always loved you for who you are. And I'm so sorry I couldn't see that and help you while I was still in a human form. She said, I just wasn't capable of it. And I was so aligned with your father and not wanting to lose him, that I couldn't see past any of, if he said to do this, I did it.
Right.
So so it was beautiful, and it really helped me see that it wasn't the earthly, physical, human form of my mother and how she's acting out. Her spirit genuinely does and still does love me. And I know my father's is like that. I just haven't had that conversation yet, but thank you. You're helping me. I need to do that. And it really did heal it. You know, I don't feel that way toward my mother at all. I still have a bit of anger toward my father. And I think it was just from his last same, he hasn't changed, and you should have walked. Well, that was back in 83 when we didn't have cell phones and it was pitch dark and a bear could have eaten me, or, you know, whatever.
Yeah. So on the note of healing, is there anything specific that you think is a good vehicle for healing?
First of all, I want to tell people healing is not linear. Just because you do A plus B doesn't mean C is going to happen. You're usually going to go off into D. I think I've had migraines for almost 40 years now. I have tried everything, but I know deep down in my core, it's been anger I've been holding on to. It's been stress. You know, it's been an emotional, spiritual combination that causes them when I get stressed. And so I still am, they're getting much, much better. I'm delighted to say, but I believe a lot of these illnesses that we are getting that don't have an organic reason are it's has to do with lifestyle, environment, and your spiritual, emotional issues that you're not dealing with. So I think from an emotional perspective, there are lots of modalities now out there to help people. There's techniques coming on board, you know, every day, including, you know, for PTSD, the use of psychodelics, and
Yes.
not that I'm promoting that, but they are looking at that. There's acupuncture, there's all kinds of different in NET is the one I used because it's not invasive, but it gets at the unconscious. There's emotional code, there's tapping, there's all kinds of things that people are doing. Not one thing works to me like this is it. It's because it's holistic, and that's why it's a wellness wheel. You have to look at your diet, you have to look at your the physical components, you have to address the mental, and the stressors that you're under, because stress is the number one reason people end up in the ER, is because of a stressor. And you have to deal with your emotions, they're going to sit in your body until you deal with them. And if you don't, they're going to come out in different ways physically. And it usually is not a pretty scene. And there are things you don't want to address, like, well, I don't want to hurt my mother, well, you may need to tell her something that's going to hurt her, and she needs to sit with those feelings, but you were taught not to hurt your mother, so it's things like that. And then of course the spiritual realm, and that is what is your concept of something greater than yourself. If you believe that, how do you relate to that in your life on a daily basis? How do you connect? There's a whole spiritual realm of angels and spirit guides that can help you. And that's what I get excited about now, is I found that I do have guides on the other side to help me and connect with them. And they are showing me different things show up for me, and I don't have to worry about how to do something now. Things just come to me, and I'm just amazed, and it just validates that, that realm is working on our behalf. They really are.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so beautiful as well that you have such conviction and certainty in what you're saying when you're talking about that spiritual side of yourself. It sounds like it sounds like it's more than belief. It sounds like you feel that you've had the experiences that have really validated this in almost in the real world in some sense as well.
Yes, and I have, and I think experience is what changes people the most. We can talk about things, but unless somebody has that experience, hence been there, done that, we can try to share that experience, strength, and hope with somebody, but it usually takes the experience of the person themselves to really get the message, and sometimes they don't get it, but that is why I feel so strong, is because I didn't have one NDE. I had two, and then an out-of-body experience. I tried to leave here several times because I did not want to stay. And my angel James was just like, you have an important mission, you really do. This is, a country a world that's filled with fear, and so many different religions have different views on death, but we will all die at some point. And if you can let go and be receptive and in the receiving mode of it, it's going to be a much easier transition. Instead of resistance.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's, aside from a near-death experience, which I'm looking to avoid, if I'm completely honest, so is there any ways that you have found effective, or other people have reported to you as being effective, in being able to tap into that spiritual side of oneself?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the dialoguing, like I said, in your journal, what is it that my soul wants to tell me? And, and energy medicine also is a wonderful tool to help you clear energy that's not yours. A lot of us that are empaths, especially, and sensitives, pick up other people's energy. And so you need to make sure that you are constantly clearing your energy. And it can be something as simple as, please remove all emotions and energies that are not mine. Whoosh, there they go. because if you're carrying someone else's energy, you're not, and emotions, you're not processing your own emotions, you're processing theirs. So to make sure that that part of yourself is clear. And then before you go to sleep at night, ask for your angels to give you some kind of evidence. What is it that you want to know? Is it their name? Is it their whatever that you want to establish a relationship? And it's as simple as that. And then be open-minded, and it may not look like you think it's going to look, to what that could be. And I think, starting there is a wonderful place. And then there's lots of YouTubes with how to connect to guides, how to connect to, angels from all different sources. If you find one that you want to listen to and it really helps you, there's usually meditations that take you into this realm. And a lot of it has to do, almost all of it has to do with your breathing as well. You need to be able, because the breath is what leaves us, right? That's the soul. So when you are breathing, especially that deep breath, you are connecting to that soul instead of just being that shallow breath. Does that help?
Yeah, it does, definitely. And I'll just tell a very quick story here. So my mum passed away October 2021, so a while ago now, and she'd had a very traumatic brain disease that had lasted for far too long, really. So it was an unpleasant length of time, but also a very unpleasant shutting down of her body. And I'd made a promise that I would be there until the very, very end, which I was. And at the very, very end, so she was laying in bed and she had very labored breathing, and it was clear that she was going to be leaving soon, but for whatever reason she wasn't going. So I was making all these promises to sort of, tie up any loose ends, like, I'll get married, okay, I'll do whatever you need me to do, you just gotta go. So like saying all this stuff just to kind of like, come on now. And when the moment came, she'd been laying for months by this point. She hadn't walked in a very long time, she hadn't really sat up independently in probably a couple of years, but in this final moment she completely sat up independently, which I'll say was terrifying, because it was kind of, it was almost like seeing a dead body lifting itself, and she wasn't even gone yet. And then she took this very deep breath and looked towards me and went like this. And so as well as being in this, traumatized state, I had the experience of her literally blowing her soul at my face at the moment that she left. And it was the most peculiar experience I think I've ever had in my life. And I just didn't expect that. I have a very good yoga teacher. She's very spiritual, and she talks to me a lot about the breath and how, the breath houses the soul is in the breath. And I spoke with her about the experience, and she said, that was her soul leaving her body in that moment. She just happened to blow it in your face as it went. And it was just a very bizarre experience.
And I would say to you, her soul blowing at you was, try to remember her in the spirit form, not in that human form.
Yes, that's a nice message. Yes. Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. Definitely.
And I think that's what's, if you're with somebody at the end, they do amazing things. I mean, a lot of them will be grabbing, and that's because they're in the veil between this realm and the spiritual realm is very thin. And so they're going back and forth through the realms, and people saying, oh, they're on their morphine, or no, they're really seeing their deceased loved one or their angels or their pets, because those are coming into them as they are getting ready to move. They do not leave alone. You are never alone. It's a spiritual form, but it's still alive. And so I want you to know that as well. You're never alone. Make sure your whole family is on board with wills and all that kind of stuff, because if you're not, I have seen so many families absolutely fall apart. The tension, the anger, the betrayal, the judgment, you get this, I didn't get that, and in the end, none of that really matters. It was just
and I get the sense that dying, for the person that's dying, is actually relatively straightforward, and, as you've experienced, quite lovely on the other side. I think where a lot of our fear has come from is not knowing that peace exists, and only having experience of, I feel grief, I feel loss, I'm having complications with the family that are left over that I'm now dealing with on the other side. And so I think that's where a lot of our negativity towards the idea of death probably comes from.
And I think that's why it's so important. Yes, we're human and we have those feelings, but to remember we're spiritual, and that's the biggest part of us. And the greater cosmic context is not about these, who gets the ring and who gets the money, all of that. It's the fact that, okay, she's gone on, she's at peace, and how can we be at peace in dealing with these remains, and it's a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not. It is a challenge because you're working with different personalities, but how can you keep yourself grounded, whether it's with crystals, whatever you need to stay grounded, your breath work, and you keep yourself in alignment and not get caught up in the trauma and drama of all of that other stuff, because in the end, and the very, very end, it really doesn't matter how many people are really using their mother's fine china these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Or their silver setting, nobody even wants it. We just had a couple across the street. Both of them passed from cancer in their late 60s, and they put one sister came and took half the house, but there was all this stuff left. Nobody wanted it in the family. They had the estate sale, everything went. And there was stuff in there. I was like, oh my gosh, why would, somebody not want this? But it's just stuff. And I think you realize that, we have don't get attached. And I think a lot of us are attached still to this piece represents my mother or whatever, instead of the memory and the spirit, and knowing that you can talk to her spirit at any point. That is always available to you, and that's more important than a ring.
100%. Nicole, where can people find your book, find you? How do people reach you from this point moving forward?
My website is www.nicolekerr.com, and on there I have a lot of podcasts. If you go to the media section, if you want to listen to some of the podcasts, and this will be up there as well. I have blogs that I've written. So the latest blog is on the second NDE that came from my trigger with the turbulence in an airplane, and that coming back to me, and my doctor surgeon validating that. My book, You Are Deathless, here's the cover of it. It's available in paperback and in hardcover, and it's also available on Audible. I just finished the audio version of it. I narrated it myself, which was a trip, let me tell you, Gemma. It's one thing to write your own book, it's another thing to use your throat chakra to voice your own story, and then to have to hear it, I'm like, that's when it hit me. That's really me. I've really been through that. And that's when I really gave myself compassion over what I've been through in my life. Before, I was still pretty hard on myself, to be honest with you. So it's on Audible. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn under Nicole Angelique Kerr or Nicole A. Kerr. You can find me. Those are the only 3 platforms I use, because I'm a one-person show here and I can't keep up with everything else. But you can connect with me through my my website. There's a contact page there, and I'd be happy to send you, the first chapter for free if you want. To see that. You can also go on, I put all the images in the book on my website. So if you want to see the car crash and all of that, you can just go on there and look as well. And for those listening to the audio, it'll say image, and now you go to the website and you can see the image. So that's how you can find me. I'm in New Bern, North Carolina. So if you ever come to North Carolina and look up New Bern, you'll find me here.
Amazing. I might do that one day,
I would love to have you. I would love to have you.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. And I feel like, even though I would say I'm not a particularly spiritual person, I guess, in a traditional sort of a sense, and I haven't been brought up in religion. I found this conversation fascinating. I think it was enlightening, and I think it's impossible to not take so much positivity from what you're sharing. And I wish you every success in your mission to help people feel and be at peace with the end when it comes, and living a happy, peaceful life up until the point that it happens.
Thank you. You just ended it beautifully. You're delightful. You are just delightful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for talking to me today.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right, what did you think? As usual, there are a few gems in there for me. One of which was, what was it Nicole said? That when she was in that healing stage originally, before she'd started to explore other modalities, she talked about sort of going back to her original faiths that she was brought up in, and she said she was going back to the language that she knew in order to process what had happened. And I thought that that was really poignant, because I feel that that's probably something that everybody does, that you're going to go back to a way of communicating that has familiarity and comfort in times of stress and struggle. And for me, as a therapist, that is something that I want to be really mindful of now, sort of taking that into the work that I'm doing with people. She also expressed how when you go to the other side, your problems are not weighed or measured, and there is no judging and no shaming. And so that is not something that we need to be carrying with us now either. It's almost like doing so is a waste of the precious life that you've got whilst you're here. And I thought as well that something she said around religion. Now, you will have heard me say in the podcast, I'm not a religious person. I was not brought up in religion. I'll be honest, sometimes I kind of feel like, I don't know, a bit jealous of my friends who are very religious, because they have there's something in that around, you know, connection and community and support, and singing maybe, because I think there's something quite beautiful in that. However, there's lots of bits to religion that I do not find comfortable, and that's probably what's kept me outside of it, to be honest, although I'm interested in it. And what Nicole said is that religion controls you by teaching you to fear death, and that's interesting. I don't think that's true in all religions. However, I would say probably for the majority of Christian faiths, that sounds like it could be true, because it's like you can't get to where, you know, that you can't get to heaven if you're taking all of your mistakes with you. You need to correct all of that, because otherwise the doors are not going to open for you. You're going somewhere really bad instead. What she added to that is, if you are fearing death, you will never truly live. And I think that that's a super important message, regardless of the religion part. If you're fearing death, you're never truly going to live. And we want to live whilst we're here, right? It sounded to me like faith is still massively important to Nicole, but she has something a bit more concrete about it now, because it's based on how it's helped to heal her. So it feels like it's had a more positive purpose in her life recently. And some of that too has come from her own open-mindedness in respect of the various different modalities that are available to you in order to heal from trauma. That there is no one size fits all. There is no magic cure, be it in psychology, psychotherapy, neuro-linguistic programming, CBT, DBT, or anything else. You have to find the thing that's the right fit for you in order to fully recover. And I feel that she is still a work in progress, aren't we all? And that it's her acceptance of that is really it seems like, I don't know where this woman's life source comes from, but for someone who's been through so much, she just struck me as someone who is full of life and zest and energy. And I like to, whenever I sort of, edit the podcast and rewatch it back afterwards, I always like to sort of latch on to one or two things about the conversation or the person where I can go, yeah, like that. I want to be like that. I'm going to model that. I'm going to apply that to myself. With Sarah Im, for example, it was her ability to overcome what I think was one of the worst traumatic events that could ever happen to a human being. And she lived to tell the tale. So she taught me something about, my problems are really not real problems in the grand scheme of things. When I spoke to David Richman, I really appreciated his story about perseverance. And the thing that really struck me with him was that he just wasn't someone who was planning on slowing down anytime soon. And I really respected that, because I often hear that I need to slow down and I'm doing too much and when are you going to take a break and blah, 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 blah. And I've often sort of been left wondering, yeah, what's wrong with me? Why am I not just like chilling out and watching Netflix every evening? Why am I doing another course? Or, that kind of thing. And speaking to him, and he was like, no, just like keep doing stuff, like keep living life. So I really got that from him. And for every single guest I have had this year, there has been something where I reflect on the conversation afterwards, or I've gone through the editing process and I just think, like, wow, like that's a thing. That's a thing to aim for. That's a way to be in life. And so for Nicole, the thing that I personally got from that conversation with her is just like, be that light, be that brightness, bring that to the party, regardless of your circumstances, because it sure as shit does something great for all of the people that are interacting with her. And I reckon it's probably been a big part of what's helped her heal to the unbelievable degree that she has managed to do in her life. So yes, I thought this was a cracking one. What did you all think? If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you were listening on a podcasting platform, make sure you go along ideally to iTunes, review the show, give it a few stars, make a comment, and share it with a friend. If you think there was something good in here, share it with someone else who you think might enjoy what was in here too. But that is it from me for 2023. So I hope you've all had a wonderful year, and I look forward to speaking to you all again in the next one. Bye! The People Building podcast was produced and edited by Gemma Bailey. You can find out more information about our products and services on peoplebuilding.co.uk, where you can also join in the conversation around specific episodes. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. It should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, we do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organisation that is presented within the podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced